early fall morning to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. On this day in 1320, Dante died of malaria. How many people know what malaria is? In Italy. Didn't know that, did you? Just months after completing the Paradiso, the third and final part of the Divine Comedy. He had been banned from his home city of Florence years before because of politics. Indeed, the government there announced he would be buried alive if he ever set foot in Florence again. Dante's not stupid. He didn't go back to Florence. He often lived in poverty for the rest of his life and wandered from city to city in northern and central Italy, estranged from his wife and children. As an exile, his only solace was to write, and write he did, working on the Divine Comedy for the rest of his life. Dante had hoped the poem would be so successful that he would be invited back to Florence. This did not happen, and indeed, his exile was not officially rescinded until 2008. Don't make the people of Florence mad. Without Dante's suffering, however, would the Divine Comedy have ever been written? I doubt he would have foreseen its continued appearance in college and high school classrooms all over the world. And it is with pleasure that I bring Professor Gene Johnson up to introduce our speaker, Professor Mark Edmundson. Gene is not quite the itinerant Dante was, but he did come to King from a background in public education. For Professor Johnson, however, coming to King, I believe, was like a homecoming. We are fortunate to have his presence here to illumine the minds of future teachers and to inspire them to make education a transformative experience for their students. And I must say one other thing. The speaker has informed me he does have a device that if he sees you on one of your devices, it will explode. So that, just a heads up, you might not want to pull those out. All right, thank you very much.
I was remotely introduced to Mark Edmundson last year by a student who recommended his book, Why Teach, that was instrumental in leading her into the teaching profession. Dr. Dale Brown had given her a copy and required her to read it as she searched for her vocational calling. Her recommendation came to me at a time when I was re-entering the teaching vocation. And Why Teach helped me create a vision of how a liberal arts education transforms those who have walked our oval at King. Mark Edmundson is a university professor of English at the University of Virginia. He is the author of 10 books and often writes about higher education issues and his own personal experiences as a teacher and as a learner. His most recent book, Self and Soul, A Defense of Ideals, was published by Harvard this year. In a review for Amazon Books on August 10th, David Clemens described Self and Soul as wildly subversive, ripping off the K-12 straitjacket incoming freshmen still wear. Edmundson's doctorate is from Yale University. He has been named a Guggenheim Fellow and has received the Daniels Family Distinguished Teaching Professorship at the University of Virginia. Dr. Edmundson spent some quality time at our Faith and Learning Retreat for King faculty last summer, sharing and challenging our thinking, as I'm sure that yours will be challenged today. His theme this morning is, What are Ideals? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Edmundson.
Hi there. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for those very generous introductions. I'm going to talk about ideals. I'm going to talk about the place that they should have in a college curriculum. And I'm going to talk implicitly about the place that ideals should have in life. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I think ideals are. I'm going to make some arguments for ideals and maybe allude to some arguments against ideals. And you will leave illuminated, or you'll leave when the talk is over. What shall we teach, we teachers of the humanities? What kind of knowledge here and now in America 2015 is most worth having? What questions shall we ask of our students? And what questions of ourselves? And how shall we ask them? What allies shall we call forth? We aspire to be mentors? Fair enough. But who shall our mentors be? What shall we learn, we students of the humanities? And we know well that teachers and students are often one. I begin, as I inevitably do, from personal experience. When I look out into the faces of my students, and especially those about to graduate, what is there to be seen? Chiefly, I see two potential attitudes toward the future. To put it very crudely, they feel that they can take it or they can leave it. Take it. What does it mean to take it? To most of my students, if I have it right, taking it means questing for success. It means going out after a good job, money, status, marriage, a family, and a home that within 30 years, give or take, will be your own. They'll go into law, medicine, or business. They hope that they will like their jobs, but they know that they may not. They know that they may have to put up with 40 or 50 or 60 trying hours a week in order to succeed. There's much more to be said about taking it, of course, but most of it already has been said. You can't talk about taking it without mention of medical insurance and college loans and parental expectations and the prospects for one's own children. But those matters have been talked about, and often positively. Even Henry David Thoreau admits that there are people who can thrive by taking it. In Walden, he speaks of strong, worthy human beings who can not only succeed, but revel and thrive in the world as it is. But it doesn't take Thoreau to tell you, though he will, that not everyone feels pleased by the life of the marketplace. He taught us to speak of lives of quiet desperation. And sometimes, as we know, worldly desperation can get quite loud. Depression, anxiety, alienation. Thoreau talks about those who make themselves ill, laying aside resources against the day of their impending illness. The students I know who see matters somewhat as Thoreau did are generally prone not to take it, but to leave it. One way or another, they try to walk away from the game. They say no to the furors of success and striving and applying to law school when they have no interest in law, and business school when they don't want to mind anyone's business but their own. They say no to driveways and insurance policies and planning for private school for the kids well before there are kids. They simply don't want to play. They want to leave it. But human beings, one might boldly say, require some positive purpose in life. And a life made out of resistance, a life made out of leaving it, doesn't offer much of that. Saying no all the time is, to borrow from Wallace Stevens, an exertion that declines. It wearies the spirit, it dulls the nerves, it stills the mind, and it can also get awfully boring. What I want to say to my students, what I want to say to you, is that there's another option between taking it and leaving it. There's something that's neither embrace of worldliness nor rejection of all things under the sun. There's something, another kind of life, and we humanities teachers ought to make that kind of life available to our students, and dare I say, to the world, with all the resources that we possess. I mean the life of ideals. I mean the life that takes a high standard as guide. I mean the pursuit of courage and wisdom and compassion and maybe creative achievement in art. I mean neither worldliness nor alienation, but embracing the ideal. But to embrace an ideal, it is first necessary to know what an ideal is and what it is not. Now, what do I mean by ideals? I can answer this question better with examples than with abstractions. The examples will come from literature and philosophy and religion, the areas I know best. These are moments, 3 of them altogether, that fascinate and move me, and that in my time teaching have never failed to move my students. Some have felt admiration and awe at what they've encountered, but others, I'm not going to lie to you here, and this is important, have felt repulsed by these moments. They have felt pushed away. In any event, these are not moments that generally provoke indifference. One of these moments comes in Homer's Iliad. It's a scene that involves the Trojan hero, Hector, his wife Andromache, and their baby Astyanax. Hector has come striding in from battle, cased in bronze armor that's filthy and covered in gore. He's wearing his helmet with its great horsehair plume. Andromache, his wife, runs up to greet him, but his son, who's being held in the arms of a nurse, explodes in terror. Who is this giant, this monster? Who is this terrifying form? Hector hears his boy's cries and immediately understands the cause. He lifts the great bronze helmet from his head. Immediately the boy stops crying and jumps into his dear father's arms. Hector is a magnificent warrior. The Trojans have no better, a stronger one. But as we see, he is also a doting father and a loving husband. He and Andromache talk together as the scene unfolds, and it is by far the most intimate and loving conversation that we hear in the poem. Hector, we find out, believed that he would die in the war with the Greeks, which indeed he will. But he knows still that it is his duty to defend his city. He'll do it with a high heart and as much intelligence as he can muster. Hector knows something else as well. He knows that he is not a natural warrior. I have learned, the Greek word I understand is didaskai, I have learned to stand in the front ranks and not to falter when the enemy comes forward, he tells Andromache and us. Hector has had to learn to be a fighter. His depiction in the poem bears this out. We sense that as great a warrior as he is, he would have been better still as the city's prime minister, and then in time, after the passing of his father Priam, as its king. He can be calm and restrained. Helen, the supposed cause of the Trojan War, says that he is one of the only men in Troy who treats her with courtesy. And so he does. King Priam is the other. Yet Hector sees that he has been born into a time of war, so a warrior is what he becomes. He risks his life and eventually loses it in the struggle to defend others who are weaker than he. That the struggle is a losing one, the Greeks of course take Troy, does not make Hector's efforts any less noble. Hector is a version of what we would now call a citizen soldier. His first calling, it seems, is to the life of peace. But when war comes, he steps forward, though he has to acquire the warrior craft, unlike his great antagonist Achilles, who is clearly a born fighter. Hector is the archetype for all of those men and women who, though they would rather live the life of peace, step up when they see that their country is threatened. They're ready to sacrifice their lives to defend themselves and defend others. The troops who went out from America to fight World War II were often citizen soldiers. When asked, they usually did not say that they were out to rid the world of fascism or to conquer evil. They were inclined to say that they wanted to do their jobs and come home. But beneath their extreme modesty, there was often a gallantry not unlike Hector's. They were ready to die for their country and for their friends. Thousands of years of history and literature tell us that this willingness to defend a noble cause is one of the highest callings a human being can answer. It is an ideal. The ideal becomes difficult to pursue, I grant, when it is not clear to what degree the purported enemy actually threatens one's nation. Hector's ideal becomes questionable when it is not certain that the conflict at hand is just. But as one enters adult life, it pays to consider the ideal of bravery, to show its serious respect, and to be open to engaging it. People who commit themselves to the life of military honor can, and sometimes do, live with a fullness and intensity that those who serve themselves and only themselves cannot really imagine. The ideal of honor is not only alive in the military. Firefighters and policemen and women are called upon to be ready to give their lives for others, and sometimes they do. At the end of a successful life in business, a man or woman may have made millions of dollars and have invested it well. A firefighter may have pulled 2 or 3 or 4 people from fire and building. He may have saved lives. She may have saved lives. Probably they have. Who rests more comfortably at the close of life then? Who nurses the most justifiable pride? Are policemen and soldiers and all who commit to the heroic ideal susceptible to corruption? Of course they are. Cops take bribes and worse. Soldiers fail to do their duty. In some cases they do worse than fail. They fight dishonorably. They commit atrocities. They let their buddies down. Ideals are always susceptible to corruption and also to frauds, that I'll be talking about with you tonight, should you choose to come. Men claim they've done heroic deeds when they have not. They pretend to be great soldiers when they are best mediocre ones. But as common in fraud and corruption can be, the genuine ideal continues to glow brightly. Human beings want their lives to matter. And one of the ways they achieve this is by committing themselves to being brave. They commit themselves, they struggle and they strain, and some of them, I believe, reach the ideal. They may not reach it every living moment, but surely there are men and women who embody the heroic ideal, and often do so with considerable modesty. It can be hard to believe, yes, but ask the ghosts of the fascists in Germany and Japan and Italy, who not all that long ago tried to enslave the world. Ask them if it's not so. I said that the marvelous moment in Homer when Hector commits himself to go on defending Troy, despite his fears and despite the fact that on some level he is not entirely made for war, concentrates one ideal, the ideal of courage. But the military ideal is not the only ideal that will face you as you look into the future. There are peaceful and humane ideals as well. One of those ideals is glowingly manifest, at least for me, during a moment in the trial of Socrates, as Plato, his great pupil, relates it to us. Socrates has been accused of corrupting the young. It's said that he has denied the existence of the gods and that he's teaching the youth of Athens the way to make the weaker argument appear to be the stronger. He's up on trial in the Athenian law court, and if he's found guilty, he will be executed. Now, Socrates, as you probably know, is innocent of the crimes charged against him. He doesn't dishonor the gods. In fact, he has very little to say about the gods. And he's not in the business of teaching people how to make slick arguments. That's the game of his arch enemies, the sophists, who teach in exchange for money, something that Socrates has never done. But Socrates has been annoying. In fact, he has outraged his fellow Athenians. Years before the trial, someone had asked the Delphic oracle a question. Who is the wisest person in Athens? The oracle must have been in a particularly good mood that day, since it answered the question directly, rather than with a riddle, as it customarily did, though as you'll see, the Delphic oracle still did manage to stir up trouble, which seems to have been its favorite pursuit. The answer to the question, of course, was Socrates. There is no one in Athens who is wiser than Socrates. Socrates, probably not being entirely unironic, said that this pronouncement of the oracle absolutely shocked him. For as far as he knew nothing at all. His ignorance didn't exist from lack of effort. He was a lover of wisdom, he said, and he was constantly on the lookout to come to a better understanding of life and to answer its crucial questions. But so far, despite all the effort, he felt that he had gotten just about nowhere. So why had the Delphic oracle singled him out for wisdom? Socrates had to know. He went around questioning the citizens of Athens one by one. He asked them what they thought the good life was. He asked them what true knowledge might be. He asked them to define piety and justice. Now his fellow citizens thought that they knew the answers to these questions. When Socrates pushed them and posed objections, their convictions began to look rather silly. Their thoughts were self-contradictory. Their arguments turned out to be full of holes. You could imagine how popular this made Socrates. Even worse was the fact that a group of young men, which included the great philosopher to be, Plato, followed Socrates around and listened to his interrogations. They found them quite humorous. They laughed, probably sometimes guardedly, sometimes not, at what the purportedly wise men among the Athenians actually amounted to under Socrates' question. The questioning and probing and bothering that he did day to day was surely the basis of the resentment against him that gathered in Athens and provoked his trial. The sniggering of Plato and his buddies could not have helped much either. At his trial, Socrates said that he thought of Athens as a thoroughbred horse, strong and very beautiful. The horse had magnificent potential, and it had already done remarkable deeds. But it had a propensity toward laziness and self-satisfaction. Socrates saw himself as a tiny, buzzing creature, a gadfly, inconsequential in himself, but necessary to keep the beautiful horse from dozing into a fat complacency. It was Socrates' vocation to deploy his stinger around Athens. The gods, he believed, wanted it that way. Socrates said that asking questions and helping people to love wisdom and virtue, that is, if they could figure out what those ideals really amounted to, was his vocation in life. He'd been born to do this. And then he says something rather outrageous and quite memorable. He says that he can no more leave off asking his questions and buzzing and stinging than Thetis' son could leave off his vocation, which has been bequeathed to him by the gods. Now, Thetis' son is the great Achilles, the archenemy of Hector, and perhaps the most formidable warrior, in legend at least, who's ever lived. Achilles is the soldier's pole, to use a phrase of Shakespeare's. He sets the standards for Western warriors for all time. Alexander the Great lived to emulate Achilles. Achilles was never far from the mind of Julius Caesar. But Socrates, like Achilles? How outrageous. Socrates was homely and poor. He had no noble lineage. His mother was nothing like Thetis, a sea goddess. Socrates' mother was Farinete, a midwife. His father was a stonecutter. Achilles' father was Pelops, a king, formidable with a spear. Socrates was married to Xanthippe, who was forever scolding him and once supposedly became so exasperated with his ostensibly indolent ways that she threw a plate of urine at him. But Socrates says it directly. I am like Achilles. I have a duty to myself and the gods. And, Socrates suggests, his way of life is no less important than the way of the hero. The quest for wisdom matters, and it matters as much to the world as the quest to be a hero. Then Socrates takes a step toward proving it, and this is the moment I want to emphasize in particular. You might tell me, he says to the court, that if I'd stopped my questioning and stinging and buzzing and wondering aloud, you'd let me go home and live my life in peace. You might imagine that I'd relish the chance to go on living under such terms. But I wouldn't. As soon as you let me loose, I'd be back doing what I do, looking for wisdom. That's my destiny, just as fighting the enemy was the destiny of Achilles. So, Socrates continues, if you want me to stop, you're going to have to kill me. Which the citizens of Athens vote to do. They decide that Socrates will have to die for the crime of thinking for himself and try to understand who he is and what men and women are and how they should live in the world. Socrates comes to no conclusions about these matters. But his great pupil, Plato, who liked to follow Socrates around and watch him work the Athenian bigwigs, did come to some conclusions. He kept asking himself the kinds of questions that his great teacher had asked, and he finally became satisfied that he could answer them. In doing so, I'm sure he had Socrates in the back of his mind. He wasn't going to let what the Athenians had done to his teacher put an end to philosophy. He was going to carry the game through. Socrates matters a great deal himself, but perhaps he matters most because he makes Plato possible. Socrates comes on the scene to rid Athens, and through Athens, perhaps the world, of overreaching error. He is the ultimate figure of skepticism and of doubt. But the philosophical ideal is about more than exposing error. It is about the pursuit of truth. Socrates sets the stage for the pursuit of truth. Plato enacts the ultimate drama of the quest. How should we live? What sort of inner life is best? How shall we govern ourselves? What sort of state is the most just? What is the correct relation between women and men? How shall we raise our children? What part does art play in life, and what part should it? What shall we do with and about music and poetry? In his major dialogues, and especially in the Republic, Plato seeks to answer all these questions and more. Socrates found that his fellow citizens lived with incommensurate misleading ideas, feelings, and opinions. He saw their minds composed of cobwebs, and he blew the cobwebs away. But what to do with a mind that has been fully cleansed through skepticism? To Plato, the answer is clear. Begin building. Socrates' effort is deconstructive. Plato stepped forward into the blank that Socrates has made and begins a grand reconstruction. Doubt is not enough for Plato. He seeks more than irony, more than skepticism, more than worldly detachment. He seeks truth, and not just a truth for the present day or for one class or race or gender, but a truth that will be true for all. Those who follow in the steps of Socrates, or think they do, and spawn only doubt, do not, I believe, work in the true philosophic tradition. The stage of doubt is critical, one affirms, but men and women cannot live by doubt alone. They need truth or aspirations to truth, and this truth is the goal of the philosophical ideal. And as Socrates suggests, there is no ideal that is higher. Everyone after Socrates and Plato who seeks knowledge is an heir of theirs and owes them gratitude. Whenever a young person pursues truth with the aim of helping not only herself but other men and women, Socrates and Plato are there somewhere in the ether, rooting her on. Every humanist who tries to tell the truth about the world she sees before her and how it might be a better place is an heir of Plato and Socrates. But every scientist who works to end disease or develop our powers to feed ourselves or drink decent water is too. Those who pursue learning so as to make better the world are heroes. They're as noble as the son of Thetis. Socrates suggested as much, and he was right. Are the pursuers of knowledge sometimes self-seekers and frauds? Of course they are. And if we are honest, we see that sometimes their motives are split between the desire to help humanity and their hunger for fame, that last infirmity of noble mind, as Milton calls it. But I believe that no thinker has ever done work of major merit without being motivated on some level, perhaps sometimes too deep for ready perception, by a love of humanity. Of course, it is tempting to put on the cloak of wisdom and pretend to be an all-knowing figure even when one is far from it. The temptation is augmented by the fact that other people often seem to pine for figures of authority. They seek out leaders and wise men to absolve them of the burden of thinking for themselves. Humans can readily fall in love with what one psychoanalyst called the subject who is supposed to know. But that does not mean that the world doesn't contain legitimate and as some selfish strivers after knowledge. You can be one of them. The life of the hero and the life of the thinker have, for us in the West, their prototypes in ancient Greece. I come now to my third idea. But the third of the great ideals makes itself manifest 400 years after the death of Socrates, and not in Rome, the then center of the world, but in Jerusalem. The ideal of compassion was not unknown to the world before the time of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. The Buddha lived 500 years before Jesus, and the Hindu wisdom that he drew upon went much further back in time. Both the Buddha and the Hindu sages taught versions of the gospel of compassion, but in the West we owe the ideal of love and kindness to the thoughts and teachings of Jesus. Jesus is a great teacher, not entirely unlike Socrates, not unlike Plato. What he taught was a way of life guided, as he said, by two simple edicts. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, and mind. That is the first. That is a radical compression of the wisdom of the Hebrew Bible, a book that had been abroad in the world for a very long time when Jesus was born. But the next edict is something new. Love your neighbor as yourself. Overcome your selfishness, Jesus says. Overcome your tribalism. He tells the story of the man beaten and robbed and left for dead in a ditch. Others pass him by and do not help him at all. But there comes along the road a Samaritan, a man who is not a wounded man's tribe. They're strangers. Ostensibly, the Samaritan owes the man in the ditch nothing, but he takes him up and binds his wounds and puts him on the back of his own animal. He leaves money for his care and his lodging and promises to return to see to the ailing man. Jesus tells the story to a lawyer who has asked him a simple question. What do you mean, Rabbi? What do you mean, teacher, when you say love your neighbor as yourself? After Jesus tells the story, he turns to the lawyer and he asks him, which man was the true neighbor to the poor man in the ditch? The young man or woman who devotes life to compassion is trying to be a neighbor to the world. She feeds the hungry and takes care of the sick and comforts the lonely and the lost in their affliction. He tends to the ones who have diseases. He ministers to those who have been overwhelmed by mental disorders. He calls every woman a sister and every man a brother. His compassion is a great gift to the world, but it is also salvation for himself. The compassionate individual does not live in the world in the same way that most people do. She is beyond caring about rank and competition and about hierarchy. Everyone is her equal. Everyone is potentially her friend. When she walks down the street and looks at passing strangers, she does not say subliminally, there is another. She says rather, there is me. Most of us live in struggle. We compete and we fight the war of each against all. The compassionate man or woman can truly be at home in the world. People commonly say that Jesus was a miracle worker, but are they sure they understand what a miracle is? The gospel tells us how Jesus managed to turn a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish into food to feed an enormous crowd. How did he do it? Was it a matter of magic? Maybe it was. But it's also possible that what Jesus did was much simpler and much more complex than conventional magic. Maybe what Jesus and his disciples did when they saw that great crowd getting hungrier and hungrier was to share the little food they had with them. What was in the disciples' pockets and packs? A few loaves of bread, a fish or two, and that was all. But maybe when the crowd saw that Jesus and his friends were willing to share everything, they reached into their own pockets too. Maybe the crowd became inspired by Jesus' compassion and possessed by it. Maybe they went from being a collection of individual beings into one large and generous being. What had been a crowd became a community. When they looked at people in the group, who had up to now been strangers, they simply said to themselves, there is me. They said it, and then they shared their food. Isn't that a miracle, if that's the fact that happened? Is it not a miracle to help people move from self-centered being to compassionate life? Surely it would be a miracle to turn a small supply of food into a great one through magic. But would it not be a comparable miracle, or even a greater one, to help make women and men better than they were only a moment ago? People who commit themselves to compassion do not produce such miracles every day, and they may not produce them at all. But they do help themselves and others to shuck off the burden of self and to feel a larger sense of being. Of the three great ideals, the ideal of compassion is the most available. The warrior needs physical prowess. The thinker needs a good mind, though more than that, he probably just needs to be honest. A compassionate person needs an open heart, and all of us, one might assume, can open our hearts. Friedrich Nietzsche, great 19th century philosopher, all but said that compassionate people were losers. He said that they couldn't compete among the strong, noble people, the warriors. So the so-called compassionate ones set up a new scale of values to apply to life. They declared that it was better to be mild and vulnerable than to be powerful. Better even to be sick than to be hale and vigorous. They used this new scale of values to promote their own status and to denigrate the truly noble ones, the warriors. Believe Nietzsche if you like. But before you do, consider immersing yourselves in the day-to-day lives of hospice workers and nurses and advocates for the poor, and ask the people who hurt the most in our society what they would do without the few who, out of goodness of heart, have chosen to become their friends. Now, I've talked to you about three great ideals: courage and compassion and the pursuit of truth or wisdom. And I've talked about them in a certain way, I suppose. What I wanted to convey about these examples of commitment to the ideal is that they are very real and very immediate. They've glowed for people for a long time. They continue to glow now. In this approach, I hope to follow Kierkegaard, who said that it is against my nature, to do what people so often do, talk inhumanly about the great as though some thousands of years were a huge distance. I prefer to talk about it humanly, as though it happened yesterday, and let only the greatness itself be the distance that either exalts or condemns. The greatness either exalts or condemns, Kierkegaard says. By this, I think he means that we need to look directly at the example of the best lives that people have led and measure our own by them. We need to do this without flinching and as honestly as we can. But I want to commend these three kinds of lives to you, and ask you who are teachers to commend them to their students. Because it seems that lives devoted to the ideal have filled people with purposeful joy. Ideals give people focus and a sense of unity. They give them a feeling of living outside of and above time. Ideals allow people to build their lives on hope rather than on personal desire. Ideals are hard. Ideals are demanding. But because they absorb all of our energies. They offer a sense of fullness. Real idealists live not only for themselves, but for others too. In fact, they often break down the border between themselves and others. We like to joke about how no one knows what we call the meaning of life. We think it's something that no one could possibly understand. But ask Socrates what the meaning of life is. And though he will not probably answer you directly, he's not prone to answering much of anything directly, the way he lived will give you a pretty good idea of what he thought. Ask Jesus, ask the saints. You might even ask the men and women who have followed the path of Hector. There are still some of them around us, though they are not always eager to talk about themselves, not liking to brag. It is true that many of those who followed the ideal paths have left the world in untimely fashion. Real warriors, real saints, and occasionally real thinkers, too, don't always have a long life expectancy. They're mown down or persecuted or cut off from ready sustenance or ignored until they near to perishing from loneliness and isolation. The ideals are dangerous. The ideals can lead to possible delusion. But think, if you will, of the times when you felt most alive. Was it not when you were being brave or being kind, or when you were thinking hard and well about something that mattered to you? Most of us will not become full followers of Buddha or Socrates or Jesus. That is, we will not try to imitate them moment to moment, term for term. We will need more protection for ourselves. These people went around virtually undefended, always saying what they thought, always doing exactly what seemed to them right. Many of us will need more defenses. We'll need to give more of our energies to cultivating what I call self. Self is all about self-preservation, defenses. It is all about desire. It is all about our biological imperative to survive and be fruitful and multiply. There are few of us who can do what Jesus did and ignore self completely. We'd be too open, too naked to the blast. The problem is that self can take over everything. We say that we'll work for the corporation for a year or two, pay down our school debts, and then launch into our mission for the poor. We come to need the suitcase and the briefcase, and the luxury lunch tastes too good to give up, at least today. Also, our culture is there ready to tell us at all times that being a successful businessman is as good as being a hero. It will tell us, too, that contributing to the church and obeying all the thou shalt nots can create a spiritual life for us. We'll be told that's as good as living for the poor. And we'll be informed from all sides that learning what we need to know so as to succeed and to butter our roles and then to rebutter them is really acquiring knowledge. We'll be told that strategizing with a friend about how to get ahead is thinking, as it took place when Plato and Socrates talked. It's true, though, that there are people out in the world who spend beyond their spiritual means. They devote themselves to compassion, say, to feeding the needy or assisting the poor, and for a while all goes brilliantly. They give and they glow internally as givers of the gift. But in time they fall apart. They burn out and collapse and need to find another line of work. What has happened? Often I think they've made a miscalculation. They've overestimated the amount of compassion they have to give. They've underestimated the level of self-supporting comfort and security they require. They believe that they're potential saints when they're potentially kindly, helpful, decent people. And when such people fall apart, they often become what's called disillusioned. They rejoin life as bitterly cynical haters of all ideals. To be an idealist, I think you probably have to know who you are. Most of us now seem to feel that making a great deal of money is the very best thing in life. And we may teach this, those of us who are teachers, however indirectly to our students. When they're surveyed, the majority of graduating college students said they would love to be rich, which is the thing they want most. But where do riches come from? I think that we pay the highest salaries in our society to a certain sort of person. This is a person who's very, very bright, very energetic, extremely focused and motivated. But it's also a person who's willing to live without the satisfaction of the ideals. She is someone who will never be able to come back from a day's labor and say, I was brave, I was compassionate, I saw the truth. Is it possible, I wonder, that we pay such people as highly as we do, not only because of their abilities, which are often truly marvelous, but for another reason as well? Is it possible that we pay them so much to compensate them for sacrificing what is most vital and satisfying in life, and devoting themselves instead to investment or litigation or corporate profit? I will say something here that some of you may find rather outrageous. I think that it is possible that virtually all jobs that command tremendously high wages annul the aspirations of the soul, and in so doing put people in considerable pain. The money they make is the compensation for that. But is it enough? Could it ever be? Our culture now, new little subject here, is adept at synthesizing the ideals. It gives us martial video games to play so we can imagine we're brave. It floods us with information and faces us with no end of news and commentary by people called pundits, so we may believe that we are wise. Before us rise impressive churches, and at their fore stand ministers who issue commandments and tell us about a fierce God of justice and renunciation. Where the ideals should be, they're the simulation of ideals. They're counterfeit. For what is culture now? Culture in the West now is frequently, if not always in its major manifestations, the counterfeiting of the ideal. Students now are encouraged by the people around them, their teachers included, to choose a profession. My advice would be different. I say rather, choose an ideal. Choose compassion or courage or thought, or have the wherewithal to say that you are not attuned to ideals or do not believe in them. If you see that compassion is your ideal, then choose a job that will let you be compassionate. Don't choose a job and then see if it might be hospitable to virtue. Choose a virtue, then a job. And you don't have to be pretentious about it. What do you want to do after you graduate? I want to help people. That's compassion. What do you want to do after you graduate? I want to protect people. That's courage. What will you do? I want to continue my education and maybe make some discoveries. That's thought. You don't have to tell people you want to save the world. You don't need to talk like that at all. Teach the ideals. That at least is what I think teachers of the humanities should be up to now. But teaching does not mean indoctrination. We're not here to inculcate ways of life. Question the ideals from every possible angle. Let Sigmund Freud, a hero of mine, who hated all ideals, have at them. Let Friedrich Nietzsche, let Karl Marx. And if that's too highfalutin, expose the ideals to the gaze of the wise, ironic gal or guy on the street. Take aim and find them. Give the ideals your best shot. But make sure first you give them a fair hearing. Get them out there in their full glory. Above all, I would say that we must not let our students accept the world of the self without a long and careful look at the great ideals. Every generation has its right to its own plebiscite about the self and the soul. My generation overall has retreated from ideals and created a world of self. But we should not be allowed to make that decision pretty young. Maybe ideals are too dangerous. Maybe they are too often conducive to fraud. Perhaps all the debunkers and deconstructionists and pragmatists and the high priests of oiliness have it right, and that life is best lived in careful, measured ways. Maybe it's true that we should protect our families and pursue our pleasures and cultivate our gardens and grow our purses. But maybe not. Maybe not. Teach the ideals. Learn the ideals. Thank you for listening to me.
Oh, somebody's phone went off, right? If you need to head out, that is perfectly fine, but if you would like to stay for questions, I encourage that. Thank you for being here today physically and intellectually, and you're welcome to come back this evening at 7 p.m. at the Student Center Boardroom, where Mark will speak on what is evil. And I encourage you to come out next Monday morning to hear our first student lecture of the year, Rachel Arrowwood, and I'm looking very forward to that. And I'll open the floor up to Mark. Someone would like to ask some questions. No problem.
All right, everybody jump into 21, leave the room. You're not younger than 21. At heart, right?
Well, you may have to actually ask the question.
Now you're stuck. Okay, so just 2 or 3 questions, and then everybody can go out into this rather beautiful day. Yeah? Anything at all? If you found this interesting, but it went by too fast, or made you dizzy, or made you angry, and you want to prolong your anger, then I have a book called Self and Soul, A Defense of Ideals. When this is all laid out, expanded, expounded, elaborated, you name it, for 300 pages. This is the short version.
Could you give us some more examples of the simulation of a counterfeit
Yeah.
we're seeing in the West?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that we like to simulate is the heroic ideal, right? And there are a lot of media for the simulation of the heroic ideal. And some of them are obvious, and some of them a little bit less so. First one would be video games, right? When you become the hero and you shoot people. I'm not saying these are the worst things in the world. They are taking the place of true ideals. They're simulations. And so you become the hero and you shoot things up. There's the heroic TV show where the guy comes in to clean up Dodge. There are movies, of course, where the one lone, just, Shane-like individual finally is driven to fire his gun and finish it all up. So there's this TV, movie, video games, that whole business. There's still some books, there's still some kind of pulp heroic writing, wish fulfillment adventures, but they're not as important by far as they used to be. And there is another instance that's a little bit more broad, actually, and more controversial, and I'll just touch on that briefly. The world of sports has become our heroic theater, I believe. And it's not that I love sports. I wrote a book about football. It's partially admiring, partially critical, but I love sports. I love to play. I have no trouble watching. My limits for watching are growing over time. But what you see in, say, a broadcast of a football game is that it's what I've called an irony-free zone. Okay? You can say these majorly celebrative things about what's going on. What a human effort, what an exertion, an astounding play. They're pretty good, But they take the rhetoric that would generally be applied to warriors at their height, and they bring it over to linebackers at their best, right? And so, that shows a couple of things. It shows that we as a culture are hungry for the heroic ideal. And it shows that we as a culture are a little bit confused about whether we should use that heroic ideal to describe our actual soldiers. Partly because a lot of us are mixed about the wars that we are now involved in. So it's very difficult to know where and how to use the rhetoric of heroism in the current military world. But we still pine for heroism. And so we not only find it, we overfind it seems to me, in sports. I mean, I've never seen our nation as sports crazed as it currently is. And I have to think about that as a displacement or as a simulation or a counterfeit of heroic ideals. So it shows the great importance of heroic ideals, and it also shows how confused we are about them, and also how scary they are to take on ourselves. We'd rather have them dramatized for us by other people in the zone of sport. So that's one of the major displacements, it seems to me. And then we can sort of talk about the others at some length. Yeah, please.
When you're talking about ideals,
Yeah.
are you talking about ideals in the Platonic sense, where we access them through contemplation on them, or is it like the ideal of heroicism? Do you achieve heroicism by contemplating on it, or by doing acts that are?
It's a good question. Yeah, give me a chance to clarify things. From my point of view, there are 3 major ideals. There's a 4th, which I didn't touch on, which is artistic creation, and the reason I didn't touch on. But read the last chapter. So, to me, the ancient world gives us 3 major ideals. First ideal is courage, then wisdom, and then compassion. Okay, those are 3 different ones. You don't achieve the ideal, you don't embody the ideal of courage by sitting around thinking about courage. You need to sit around thinking about courage as you train yourself to be a soldier, a policeman, a fireman, what have you. But after you finish thinking about it, then you go out and do it. Okay? My sense of I can see why this is a little confusing. I think that Plato gives us the ideal of the thinker, right? If you're gonna think, try to do what Plato did, though you probably come up with different conclusions, right? Plato has another use for the word ideal, right? that is part of his philosophy, and that's peripheral. It's not involved in the discussion that I want to have at this point. And then there's the ideal of compassion. You know, you might study the great compassionate beings and their texts, Jesus, Buddha. Then you say, you know, if you're really drawn to it, how can I do that, or how can I do a little more of that than what I may be doing right now? Because I do want to say that if you just take a little bit of these ideals and inject them into your life, life gets better, almost inevitably. It seems to me life gets better, though life gets more difficult too. Life gets more difficult too. You know, like showing up at the hospital and, you know, comforting dying people it's awful. It's awful, but it's also amazingly great for those who can do it. Right? It's, you know, thinking about really hard problems gives you a headache. It makes you sick. It makes you frustrated. It makes you sad. It gives a darn what you're thinking about. It's awful, but it's great too. You know, these are where the great rewards are and where the great frustrations are. But the great frustrations don't matter so much because the great frustrations are attached to a life of meaning. You know why you're doing what you're doing, right? I mean, if you're living the life of desire, which I'll caricature here a little bit, it's more complex than I'm saying. You know, your goal is a new car, your goal is a better job, your goal is a better house. And you find, as everybody knows, when you get a better job, when you get a better car, when you get better clothes or something, you feel good for about, you know, between 5 minutes and 5 weeks, right? And then a bunch of other desires replace the desire that you had, and off you go again. I'm not saying that buying a new pair of shoes is like the end of the world, but they never quite yield what you think they were going to, you know, in terms of satisfaction. The ideals do yield these forms of meaning. I wouldn't call it satisfaction, but meaning, intensity, commitment, conviction, being outside of time, feeling that you're really involved with something. But they also hurt, you know. But people, in my opinion, or at least a lot of people, they want meaning at this price of difficulty more than they want pleasure, you know, associated with desire, associated with consumption. That just doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't work for anybody, from what I can tell. I mean, based on the way I see people who live for stuff, behaving. Though there are other forms of the life of self that I think are more. One more? Two more? Yes?
Do you have examples of non-militant paradigms of courage?
No, I think, and I'm quite open to being disagreed with about this, that the highest form of courage is the willingness to give one's life for one's country. That's on the top. And other forms of activity can be called courage insofar as they approach that particular level. I have no doubt that there are compassionate people who can be called courageous.
Jesus.
Yes, but chiefly what they are, from my point of view, is compassionate. That's chiefly what they give us. But I think that's quite possible, to be courageous in one's compassion. But compassion is the name of the game. I mean, you know, just stop there. And I think you may disagree with this, but this is how I ended up seeing it after studying these things. Yes?
What do you think the ideals, you know, I appreciate you choose one. I want to help people. I choose compassion. But it seems to me the ideals are mutually dependent. Compassion requires courage and wisdom. Wisdom requires courage and compassion. They interpenetrate and are mutually dependent. So to pursue one is to pursue all of them.
There's a sense in which that may be true, right? But I wanted to isolate them for reasons of clarity and simplicity. And I did that because I think they've passed so far out of circulation that we need a clear and straightforward vision of what they are in their essence. I think there's truth in what you're saying. At the same time, I think that the ideals sometimes are also in conflict with each other, right? That is, if you are truly a compassionate individual, you have the greatest doubts about war, and you may well be a pacifist, okay? So there's real conflict there. And I try to not resolve this conflict, I point to it. And then I say, hey, that societies need both kinds of people. They need people of peace, and they need people of war, and they need people of thought. And there will be conflicts, and there will be collaborations, and there will be alliances within individual souls, and for people who choose these particular ideals. But ultimately, I wanted to stress the clarity and purity of these particular ideals, so people could get a sense of what it was they were getting into. I mean, I could see somebody being a very compassionate worker with the poor, right? Very compassionate worker with the poor, very kind to her dead, doing what you're supposed to do. And this, to me, is one of the highest forms of life, right? I remember when I was a kid, I walked down the street once, and I saw a bunch of nuns, sisters, and they were, I knew, little sisters, what we call little sisters of the poor, right? And they were just in their habits, you know, just covered in, I'm looking rather like women in the Middle East, which is an interesting kind of analogy to think about. Some women in the Middle East. And they were walking down the street just near Boston. And they were laughing their heads off. They were the best time I've ever seen, right? I thought, how could they be in a good mood, right? Like they have no money, they eat really crappy food, they don't have any dates, they're going to be single forever, they're married to Jesus. Right? These are miserable people. What are they laughing about? It's clear what they're laughing about. They picked out the thing that made them have a great time. They're compassionate individuals. Or they're trying to be, right? They're trying to be there. They don't worry about many things that you and I may worry about. But I think somebody could be that without being all that intellectual. Right? You don't have to be wise. You just have to see, Jesus says, sell what you have and give it to the poor, then come and follow me. Just like, sounds right. You don't have to be a genius to do that. And also the little sisters of the poor that I saw, we're not going to get into any major battles or anything. They weren't going to be doing much street fighting. They just have to be compassionate. So I don't think you need all three of them together. I think of myself as a sort of partial thinker, and I don't think of myself as necessarily one of the boldest people who ever lived. Always looking 5 different ways when I cross the street, that sort of thing. And in terms of compassion, put it this way, I can only spend about 3 hours a day with other human beings before I start going a little bonkers. But I'm a decent school teacher, so that's my thing. So I don't think they all need to be combined. Now that I think about it. Anybody else go on? Yes, please.
I was just going to.
You're double dipping here, but okay. Extra tuition.
I was going to just add a question from that question. There's a point where it seems like things like courage kind of become subjective. So like the compassionate person will say, go to the ghetto and give clean meals to addicts in the hopes that they don't get any diseases. So that is courage and compassion. And that same person could also have some sort of disagreement with war or disagreement with wartime heroes. But they both seem like examples or archetypes of compassion or of courage. So is there a point to where these ideals become subjectivized depending on the person?
If I could do one thing for all the students in America and all the humans in America, I would take the word subjective and send it on vacation. Okay? It's just a word that clouds over it. Okay? So let me break this down a little bit. You could say these ideals are subjective, right? These 3 ideals that you come up with are subjective. And I would say, no, not at all. They're encoded in major texts that have been meaningful to us for thousands of years. This is why I won't let the artistic thing in. It hasn't stood the 2,000-year test yet. Okay? It's like the 200-year test. It's nothing. It's a child. Stood the 2,000-year test. And there is no society that you can go to. Not anywhere. Okay? Try to find a place where warriors are not held in high esteem, at least by some segment of the population, or historically have not been so. It's been so for thousands of years. Right? Where wise men and women, they may be PhDs, they may be physicians, they may be psychoanalysts, but they may also be shamans or griots or medicine people, always held in high esteem. People who are kind, people who are saintly, people who give of themselves without really, in the process of knowing themselves, they are always thought highly. Every culture you can go to, there will be none, I dare say. I mean, there's some talk about how the American pueblos didn't like fighting. I don't know. Maybe. But you gotta really look hard, right? These 3 things have been revered, not just in America, not just in Europe, but all through the world, from the beginning of recorded time. Now, there have been people who did not, for instance, revere compassion. The Romans did not revere compassion. When Jesus came along, the centurions were looking like, what is this fellow talking about? Though he got through to some of them. It seems to have become buddies with at least one of them, right? Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, speak but the word, and his soul shall be healed. That's a centurion talking. There really is some clarity, though the compassionate ideal seems to grow up about 500 years before the birth of Jesus and become major. It sort of enters in with the ideal of intellection and the ideal of the word. So I wouldn't call them subjective. I would much more, and I don't know if this is a technical riff of mine. They've been established by long-standing culture. But we, dopes that we are losing contact with them. We're losing contact with them. I think the only game in town is being a success or being a failure. I don't think so. It doesn't cost any money to do most of these things. Right? So subjective, I want to send them on vacation. In terms of, somebody's thinking that it would be compassionate to bring needles into the ghetto or the inner city or whatever the term of art is in this moment, I think there could be an argument about that between two compassionate people. It'd be a perfectly fine argument. And it would, be intellects using their powers to forward the cause of compassion, but compassion would be the name of the game. So I'm not worried that much about confusion. Once people go to the major texts and they see what Jesus tells you about how to be compassionate, and they see what Buddha tells you, and they take a look at Hector, and they take a look at Plato, the thinker, and what he did, and Socrates, what he think, it can be pretty clear in your mind. You're going to be constantly frustrated, constantly humiliated, or at least turned back on, or confused, but you know what the game is, you know what you're supposed to do. It's pretty clear. It's just really hard. But it does give you a sense of, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. That'd be a note to end on, okay? We're all doing the right thing. Well, we could all.
Thank you.